The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across my front porch as deputies shouted for someone to stand down. Through the window, I could see Marla Kincaid, my neighbor and self-proclaimed HOA president, pounding on my door, her face twisted with rage, screaming that I had stolen her house. My house. The one my late aunt left me, the one I rebuilt with my own two hands. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if she hadn't just spray-painted promise to me across my garage 2 days earlier. I stood frozen for a second, realizing how far she had gone from petty insults to full-blown madness. She called 911 claiming I was squatting on her property. I had the deed, the proof, everything. But at that moment, logic didn't matter, only chaos did. Before we dive into this wild HOA showdown, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy true revenge against entitled neighbors like this one, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to explode. After 35 years in the New York City Fire Department, I thought I'd seen every kind of chaos imaginable: burning buildings, car wrecks, citywide blackouts, and the kind of panic that eats people alive. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the slow burn insanity that came from living next to Marla Kincaid, the self-anointed queen of the Homeowners Association in rural Colorado. When I retired at 60, I wanted quiet, peace, birds instead of sirens. So I packed up my life and moved to Pinellas County, where my late Aunt Ruth had left me a farmhouse, a beautiful old place, built in the 1942, with a wraparound porch, redwood beams, and fruit trees that still produced apples every fall. The land stretched far enough that I could stand in the middle of it and not see another soul. That's what I loved about it. Space, silence, a place to finally breathe. The first year was heaven. I fixed the fence, planted new grass, and restored the house with my own hands. When the wind blew through the valley, you could hear it hum softly through the trees, a sound that could calm a man who'd lived through too much noise. Then one spring afternoon, a beat-up trailer rattled its way onto the empty plot next door. I remember the sound of that engine sputtering like a dying lawnmower and thinking, well, there goes my peace and quiet. Out stepped Marla Kincaid, a woman in her mid-40s with oversprayed blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of permanent scowl that could sour milk. She wasn't moving in quietly either. Within days, she had a pair of old lawn chairs, a plastic kiddie pool, and a stereo, blasting what I can only describe as country pop gone wrong. Her kids, 2 of them, both loud and wild, ran screaming across the dry grass, like it was their own personal racetrack. At first, I tried to be polite. That's just how I was raised. I waved, said hello, even offered her some apples from the orchard. She smiled that fake, tight-lipped smile people use when they're already judging you, and asked, "How many rooms you got in that house?" 4, I answered cautiously. 4, she repeated, eyes widening like I'd confessed a crime. "For just you," I chuckled awkwardly. "It's a family house. Been here for generations." She gave a soft, patronizing laugh. "Well, that's a lot of space for one person. My kids could really use room to stretch their legs." That was the first red flag. The second came a few days later, when she mentioned she was the HOA president of the new subdivision across the dirt road. I didn't think much of it at the time until she said, "Technically, our association covers this whole valley, you know. Even your property might fall under our jurisdiction." That word jurisdiction rolled off her tongue like she was a small-town sheriff in a cheap reality show. I told her politely that my deed didn't mention any HOA, and the land had been privately owned long before her community even existed. Her expression changed instantly, a flicker of irritation under that painted-on smile. Over the next few weeks, she became what I can only describe as an uninvited inspector. Every time I worked outside, trimming trees, mowing, repainting, she'd appear at the edge of my property line with her arms folded. You know, she'd shout, "Those paint colors aren't HOA approved," or "Your grass is 3 inches too long, that's a violation." It would have been comical if she hadn't been so damn serious. I started ignoring her, but she doubled down. She sent courtesy notices printed on HOA letterhead demanding I correct violations and pay fines. Each one more absurd than the last. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I was sanding down the porch rail when I heard footsteps behind me. Marla stood there holding a folder and smiling like she was about to close a business deal. "Mr. Phillips," she began, her tone syrupy sweet, "I've been thinking your house is just too big for one person. I have 2 growing children, and frankly it makes more sense for us to live here. You could take my trailer. It's cozy, and more than enough space for a man alone." I stared at her, certain she was joking. Then I laughed, a deep, involuntary laugh that slipped out before I could stop it. "You can't be serious," I said. Her face twisted instantly. The sweetness drained away, replaced with cold fury. I am completely serious, she snapped. I'm offering you a fair swap. My trailer for your farmhouse. You'll thank me later. Marla, I said calmly, this house was my aunt's. It's family property. I'm not trading it for anything, least of all a trailer that's one bad storm away from collapsing. That did it. She exploded. You selfish old man, you don't even need a house this size. You've probably spent your whole life thinking only about yourself. I wanted to tell her about the burns on my arms from crawling through fires to pull people out, about the 24-hour shifts, the funerals, the friends I'd buried. But instead I just turned and went inside before I said something I'd regret. From that day forward it was war, though I didn't realize it yet. She started glaring at me every time I stepped outside. Her kids began tossing their toys into my yard, accidentally climbing my trees. Once I caught one of them trying to peel bark off a peach tree with a screwdriver. When I told them to stop, Marla came storming out like a mother bear. Don't you dare yell at my children. They can play wherever they want. This is a community. Community or not, I said this is private property. Keep them out of my orchard. She stormed off, muttering about reporting me to the board. The board as if I was part of her ridiculous HOA fantasy land. After that encounter, I started keeping a journal. Every insult, every trespass, every ridiculous notice she sent. I wrote the date, the time, and what happened. It was partly out of habit. Firefighters document everything, but mostly because I had a feeling she'd cross the line eventually. And she did. One afternoon, after spending the day fishing at a nearby lake, I came home to find something that made my blood run cold. In big red spray paint across my garage door were the words, "Promise to me." For a full minute I just stood there staring at it, my hands shaking. The arrogance of it. The delusion. I could almost hear her voice. You said it was mine. Neighbors confirmed later that she'd been telling everyone I had offered her the house as a gesture of goodwill, but then backed out. The story was spreading fast, and I realized I had to do something before rumors became evidence. That's when the letter came. A ridiculous piece of paper folded neatly in my mailbox, typed up with official-looking language but full of spelling errors. It claimed I had agreed to gift the property to Marla Kincaid in the spirit of neighborly charity, and that she had filed this agreement with the state of Colorado. I took it straight to Jana Whitfield, a local attorney I'd met at the county fair. She read it once, then laughed out loud. This isn't even notarized, she said, sliding it back across the desk. It's legally meaningless. But you should keep it just in case. Just in case, I asked. She leaned forward. People like her don't stop when you ignore them, Gary. They escalate. Document everything. Every word, every action. If she trespasses again, call the sheriff. And that's exactly what I did. From that day on, I stopped thinking of Marla as a nosy neighbor. She was something else entirely, a ticking time bomb wrapped in HOA authority. She wasn't just after my peace and quiet anymore. She was after my home. And I was about to find out just how far she'd go to take it. It started small, the kind of neighbor drama you'd expect in suburbia, except we weren't in suburbia. This was rural Colorado, a stretch of farmland and pine woods that didn't even have sidewalks, much less manicured lawns. Yet somehow, Marla Kincaid managed to drag her suburban HOA nonsense right out into the wilderness. A week after the Promise to Me graffiti incident, she began what I can only describe as a campaign of harassment. It was like she had made me her personal project, her mission in life. Every day brought something new. Sometimes it was a fake violation notice taped to my mailbox with the HOA logo printed on cheap paper. Sometimes it was her kids kicking their soccer ball across my fence and accidentally trampling the vegetable patch I'd been tending since spring. And sometimes it was just her standing on the property line, arms crossed, watching me. It's hard to explain the kind of tension that builds when someone invades your peace like that. It's not about fear, it's about the constant pressure of knowing someone is always watching, always plotting. I'd be repairing the fence, and I'd feel her eyes on me. I'd look up, and there she was, pretending to check her phone while clearly taking photos. I confronted her once, trying to keep my composure. Marla, what are you doing? She smiled like a cat playing with its food. Just documenting violations for the HOA records. Violations, I asked, tightening my grip on the fence post. This isn't your HOA. Her smile didn't falter. Oh, Gary, you're mistaken. Our new boundary map clearly shows this area within Pine Elk Estate's jurisdiction. You're legally obligated to comply. I had to laugh, a bitter, exhausted kind of laugh. Lady, this house has been here since the 1940 seconds. The HOA didn't exist until 5 years ago. You can't just redraw lines because it suits your ego. Oh, we'll see about that, she said, snapping one last picture before walking off like a victorious attorney in a courtroom drama. Later that day, I checked my mailbox again. Inside was an envelope with a return address labeled Pine Elk HOA office. It contained a typed notice of violations. Apparently, I was guilty of 6 infractions. Non-standard exterior paint color, unauthorized landscaping, improper waste, storage compost bin visible from road, unregistered vehicle my old truck, unsanctioned fencing height 4 feet over their maximum, failure to pay monthly HOA dues, totaling $1,200. I almost tore it in half, but something in me said to keep it. Instead, I filed it away with her fake gift letter. A few days later, she escalated. I caught her standing at the far corner of my orchard, with a measuring tape jotting things down. I shouted, "You're trespassing." She didn't even flinch. "Just verifying property compliance, Gary. Nothing personal." That night I installed motion lights and a trail camera facing the orchard. I wasn't taking chances anymore. Every picture, every video, every sound, I wanted proof. The next morning I heard yelling outside. When I stepped out, she was there again, standing with her phone up, live streaming to what looked like Facebook. "See everyone," she was saying to the camera. "This man's refusing to comply with HOA safety standards. He's got dangerous equipment and refuses inspections." I walked up slowly, trying to stay calm. "Marla, you need to stop recording me and get off my land, now." She smirked and turned the camera toward me. "Oh, he's threatening me." "You're all seeing this, right? A violent old man threatening a single mother." That's when I realized she wasn't just delusional, she was manipulative. She knew exactly what she was doing, trying to provoke me into reacting on camera so she could twist it against me. I turned and went back inside. I wasn't giving her that satisfaction, but the tension kept growing. Within weeks, other residents from her HOA began driving by, slowly some stopping to take photos. I started getting anonymous letters slipped under my door, all variations of the same message: "You don't belong here." The next step was the law. I went to the Pine Elk County Sheriff's Office with my documentation, photos, letters, timestamps. Deputy Rick Lawson, a seasoned officer with a mustache that screamed, "Seen it all," listened patiently. "Sounds like she's trying to establish control," he said after flipping through the papers. "Problem is, without proof of property damage or a clear threat, we can only warn her. HOA disputes don't usually cross into criminal unless it's vandalism or trespass." I showed him the spray-painted garage photo. "That's vandalism, isn't it?" He nodded. "Sure is, but unless you have video or eyewitnesses, it's circumstantial. I'll file the report, but don't expect much unless she slips up again." So that's what I waited for her to slip up. And she didn't disappoint. A week later, my trail cam caught her in full daylight, stepping into my yard with one of her friends' clipboard in hand, snapping photos of my deck. I printed the images and marched them straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Lawson whistled low. "Yup, that's trespassing." He drove out to her trailer that afternoon and gave her a warning. I could see it from my porch, the flashing lights, the deputy standing there, while she gestured wildly, clearly yelling about community bylaws and citizens' authority. She must have realized then that the county didn't care about her HOA power trip, because the next day she doubled down again. That morning I woke up to the sound of banging metal. When I looked out the window, 2 men in orange vests were hammering a Notice of Property Lion sign into my front lawn. I stormed out in my robe, waving my arms. "What the hell is this?" One of them looked startled. HOA order, sir. Says you owe back fees. We're just doing our job." "There is no HOA here," I snapped. "You're trespassing too," they shrugged, muttered apologies, and yanked the sign back out before speeding away. My blood boiled. Marla had forged or faked an official lien notice, which was not only harassment but a felony if filed with the county. That's when I called Jana Whitfield my lawyer again. She didn't even sound surprised. "Typical HOA tyrant behavior," she said. "They love power until someone holds them accountable. File this with the sheriff and get ready, she's not done yet." Jana helped me prepare a cease and desist letter citing Colorado Revised Statute 38 to 33.3 to 116, which clearly states that no HOA authority extends beyond recorded covenants. It was airtight. She even had it notarized and mailed directly to Marla with return confirmation. A few days later, I saw her pull the letter from her mailbox, skim it, then tear it into pieces right there in the driveway. She didn't even try to hide it. 2 nights later, I heard footsteps again, this time near the porch. My motion lights flicked on, catching her shadow slinking away into the dark. The next morning, there was something new on my garage. Not graffiti this time, but a handwritten note taped to the door. "This property will soon belong to its rightful owner. Consider this your final warning." That was the moment I decided it wasn't just neighbor trouble anymore. It was a threat. I called the sheriff again, and they sent out 2 deputies to take the note as evidence. Marla stood on her porch across the fence, arms crossed, grinning like she'd already won. Deputy Lawson approached her. "You understand that continued harassment or trespassing could lead to arrest, right, ma'am?" She smirked. I'm the HOA president. You can't arrest me for doing my job. Lawson chuckled dryly. Ma'am, your job ends where his property line begins. She glared at him, then turned and slammed her trailer door. As the deputies drove off, Lawson rolled down his window and said to me quietly, "Keep your cameras rolling, Mr. Phillips. People like her only learn the hard way." I didn't know it yet, but that hard way was coming faster than either of us expected. Because, just a week later, she would make a 911 call that would turn my quiet farm into a full-blown crime scene, with flashing lights, shouting deputies, and me standing on my porch, wondering how in God's name my retirement dream had turned into an HOA nightmare. It was a Tuesday morning, calm bright, with that golden kind of sunlight that makes everything look peaceful. I was on my porch sipping coffee when the first police cruiser rolled down my gravel driveway, sirens off but lights still flashing. Behind it came another, then another. 3 county patrol units pulling up to my house at 8:30 a.m. My first thought was that something bad had happened in the neighborhood. A break-in, an accident maybe. But then I saw Marla Kincaid standing across the fence in her bathrobe, arms folded, smirking like she was watching a performance she'd written herself. One of the deputies stepped out, hand resting near his holster, eyes scanning the property. "Sir, we received a report about a possible squatter refusing to vacate this residence." "Are you the homeowner?" I almost spit my coffee out. "Excuse me, a squatter," he nodded, calm but cautious. The complainant stated that the legal owner of this property, a Miss Marla Kincaid, was being prevented from entering her home. Said you were armed and hostile. Behind him, Marla shouted, "That's him. That's the man he broke in weeks ago and refuses to leave my house." The other deputy turned to her, already looking tired. "Ma'am, please stay back until we confirm the situation." I took a deep breath, set my mug down, and said evenly, "Officers, my name is Gary Phillips. I've lived here since 2018. This property was passed down from my Aunt Ruth Coleman. I have the deed, the tax receipts, the utilities, everything in my name. Would you like to see them?" The senior deputy, Lawson, the same one who'd handled my earlier reports, stepped forward and sighed. "Yeah, Gary, go ahead and grab them for me." It took less than 2 minutes. I handed him the deed neatly stored in a folder with a certified copy from the Pinellas County Recorder's Office. He scanned it, then looked at me. "Okay, that checks out." Then he turned to Marla. "Ma'am, this deed lists Mr. Phillips as the rightful owner of this property. Can you show us any legal documentation proving otherwise?" Marla's confidence faltered for the first time. I have a letter." He promised to give it to me. Lawson pinched the bridge of his nose. "A letter isn't a deed, ma'am. And according to what I see here, this land doesn't even fall under your HOA boundaries. So unless you've got something filed with the county, you're wasting our time." Her face went red. "I am the HOA president. I don't need a county record. This community recognizes my authority." Another deputy muttered under his breath, "Good Lord, another one of those." I wanted to laugh, but I held it in. Lawson kept his tone steady. "Ma'am, misuse of 911 is a criminal offense. You can't call emergency services for civil disputes, especially when you've already been warned for trespassing. Do you understand?" Marla's lips trembled. "You're taking his side. He's dangerous. He yelled at my kids. He threatened me." Lawson gestured toward my cameras mounted along the porch. "Yeah, funny thing about those, they record audio too. We've reviewed enough footage from this property to know who's been doing the yelling." Her jaw dropped slightly, then snapped shut. Without another word, she stomped back toward her trailer, muttering something about corruption and favoritism. When the deputies left, I felt a brief wave of relief, but it didn't last. I knew she wasn't done. She'd been embarrassed in front of law enforcement, and people like Marla don't take humiliation well. That evening, I called Jana Whitfield, my attorney, to fill her in. She sighed. Classic escalation. False reports like that can lead to a restraining order if she keeps it up. Start documenting the 911 incident. Get a copy of the call record if you can. I did exactly that. The next morning, I drove to the county office and requested the 911 log. It confirmed everything: her name, her fabricated complaint, even the timestamps matching when the deputies arrived. Jana helped me file for a no-contact order under Colorado Revised Statute 1314104-5, which covers harassment and repeated false reporting. "It's not guaranteed," she said, "but with this much evidence, we have a shot." A few days later, a deputy came by to serve her the paperwork. I watched from my window as Lawson approached her trailer. She opened the door, reading glasses perched low on her nose. When he handed her the order, her face turned crimson. "What's this?" she demanded. "A restraining order," Lawson said flatly. "You're not to approach or contact Mr. Phillips in any way, verbal, written, electronic. Violate it, and you'll be arrested." She ripped the paper in half right there. "This is a joke," she shouted. "You can't silence the president of the HOA." Lawson looked unimpressed. Then I suggest you start reading the fine print, because next time it won't be a warning. The next week was eerily calm, too calm. No shouting, no notes, no drive-bys. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message. Then, early one Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with an alert from my motion camera. I pulled up the feed and froze. There she was, Marla, standing at the edge of my porch in the pre-dawn light, whispering to someone off camera. When the second figure stepped into view, another woman younger, maybe in her 30s, my stomach dropped. They both started walking toward my front door. Unbelievable, I muttered, grabbing my phone and dialing the sheriff's office. The dispatcher answered quickly. 911. What's your emergency? This is Gary Phillips at 154 County Route 7, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I have a restraining order against a woman named Marla Kincaid. She's on my property right now with another person. I have live camera footage. Stay inside and keep the door locked, Mr. Phillips, the dispatcher instructed. Deputies are on their way. Outside, Marla's voice grew louder. Open the door, Gary. You can't keep what's mine forever. I could hear her pounding on the wood, her voice cracking between rage and desperation. The younger woman, her friend, tried to pull her back, but Marla was too far gone. He stole my home. He tricked me, she screamed. For 10 minutes I stood just behind the locked door, phone pressed to my ear, waiting. Then flashing lights cut through the darkness. Deputies rushed in, shouting commands. Marla kept screaming until one of them restrained her. Even as they led her to the patrol car, she twisted her neck toward me, eyes blazing. You can't stop me, Gary. The truth will come out. The next day, Lawson called to confirm what I already knew. She'd been arrested for trespassing and violating a court order. She's facing 2 misdemeanors, he said. Judge might tack on community service, maybe counseling if we're lucky. I exhaled slowly. Counseling sounds like a good start. You'd be surprised, he replied. Most of these HOA types think they're above the law, but sooner or later they hit a wall. Still, even with her gone, at least temporarily, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Marla was vindictive, obsessive. She wasn't the type to give up after one night in a holding cell. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, her friend, the same woman from that night, started showing up instead, parking her car near the end of my driveway, sitting there for hours. When I finally approached her one afternoon, she rolled down her window and smirked. Just making sure justice gets served, she said cryptically. That night I emailed Jana. She's using proxies now, I wrote. Do I need another restraining order for this one too? Jana replied almost instantly. Document everything. But don't engage. You've already won the moral ground, now we build the legal case to finish this. So I did what she said. Cameras rolling, journals, updated evidence sealed. Every word, every photo, every motion clip was logged meticulously. I'd spent my career fighting fires, this was no different. You don't win by yelling. You win by staying calm, steady, and letting the flames burn themselves out. But I had no idea that the next twist would come not from Marla directly, but from a county land dispute that would blow everything open. Because as it turned out, Marla's trailer wasn't even parked on her own land. And when the real owner found out, the entire HOA war went from neighborhood drama to full-blown legal disaster. When I thought the storm had finally passed, Colorado decided to remind me that peace is always temporary. For almost a month after Marla's arrest, things were quiet. I repainted the garage, replaced the railing she'd damaged, and finally took the time to breathe again. The fruit trees started to bloom, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, and for a brief moment, I remembered what retirement was supposed to feel like: calm, predictable, simple. But then one morning in late spring, I saw something that made my stomach knot up all over again. A silver pickup truck was parked near Marla's old trailer, and 2 men in county surveyor vests were walking the boundary line, measuring and staking flags into the ground. I walked over, cautious but polite. Morning, gentlemen. Everything all right out here? One of them looked up, checked his clipboard, and asked, You, Mr. Phillips? That's me. Then you'll want to know this parcel here, he pointed toward the patch of dirt where Marla's trailer sat. Doesn't belong to her. Never did. Belongs to a rancher named Thomas Avery. He just filed a complaint after getting tax notices for unpermitted occupancy. I blinked. You mean she's been living here illegally? Looks that way, he said. She set up her trailer about 30 feet over the legal property line. Mr. Avery's hired an attorney. County wants her gone within 30 days. I nearly laughed, not out of mockery, but pure disbelief. For months, that woman had accused me of stealing her land, called me a squatter, filed fake notices, and now it turned out she was the trespasser all along. When I got back to the house, I called my lawyer Jana and told her everything. She chuckled softly. Oh, Gary, this is poetic justice. Avery's a name I recognize. Old ranching family, owns half the Eastern Valley. If she's encroaching on his land, she's about to learn what real consequences look like. That afternoon, a white SUV with the Avery Ranch logo pulled up next to the trailer. Out stepped a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat and worn leather boots. Thomas Avery himself. He looked like he'd been carved out of sandstone, every wrinkle lined with experience and exhaustion. Marla, of course, came storming out the moment he knocked on her trailer door. "Can I help you?" she demanded, arms crossed. He spoke calmly, almost kindly. "Ma'am, you're on my property. You've got 30 days to vacate. County will be sending you written notice." She laughed loud, shrill, disbelieving. "Your property, I'm the HOA president. This lot's under community management." He didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, my deed's older than your HOA by about 50 years. I've got the records, the plats, and the taxes to prove it. You'll be gone by the 1st of next month." Then he turned, tipped his hat to me, and drove off like it was just another Tuesday. I thought that would be the end of it. But with Marla, nothing ever ends quietly. Within days, she started filing complaints everywhere: the county zoning, office code, enforcement, even environmental health. She accused me, Thomas Avery, and half the valley of conspiring to steal community property. One letter to the county clerk claimed that citizens of the HOA are under siege by non-compliant outsiders. Her desperation was starting to look like panic. Maybe she realized her house of cards was falling apart, or maybe she truly believed her own lies. Either way, it was unraveling fast. 2 weeks later, I was subpoenaed to testify in a county court hearing over the encroachment dispute. So was she. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early, dressed in my best shirt and boots, polished for the first time in years. Jana was there beside me, calm as ever. Marla strutted in 15 minutes late, wearing a blinding pink blazer and dragging a thick binder stuffed with what I assumed was nonsense paperwork. She glared at me across the courtroom like we were in some kind of Western showdown. When her turn came, she stood up and launched into a speech that sounded rehearsed, all about communal ownership, spiritual inheritance, and how she'd maintained and beautified the land for years. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Judge Rowland, listened for about 30 seconds before cutting her off. "Miss Kincaid, do you have any legal documentation supporting your claim to this land?" Marla fumbled with her binder, flipping pages. I have a community charter signed by all HOA members. It grants jurisdiction over properties within Pine Elk Estates. The judge interrupted, tapping her pen. "Not this parcel. According to the county plat map, this land lies outside the HOA boundaries. You have no authority here." Marla's face fell, but she tried again. "But I was told." "By whom?" the judge pressed. She hesitated. By myself? As president?" The courtroom chuckled. Even the bailiff bit his lip to hide a smile. Judge Rowland sighed. "Miss Kincaid, ignorance of the law does not grant ownership. You are ordered to vacate the property within 30 days. Any continued occupation will be considered trespassing." And just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. Outside the courthouse, she cornered me in the parking lot. Eyes, wild hair, disheveled. "You think this is over, Gary? You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I raised an eyebrow. "Marla, you embarrassed yourself." She jabbed a finger toward me. "You and that rancher, you're part of this. You think I don't see it. You're trying to erase my authority." "Authority," I said calmly. "You had a fake HOA boundary and a stolen patch of dirt. That's not authority, Marla. That's delusion." She let out a guttural scream and kicked the side of my truck before storming off. A deputy immediately intercepted her, warning her that her restraining order was still active. Jana watched the whole scene and sighed. "She's going to self-destruct soon," she said quietly. "People like her always do. The ego can't survive reality." The next week, things got even stranger. The county assessor's office contacted me asking if I knew about several fraudulent documents submitted under my name, including a transfer of title claiming I deeded my property to the Pine Elk HOA in perpetuity. The signature looked nothing like mine, the notary stamp was fake, and the entire thing had been printed on cheap paper. They traced the submission back to, you guessed it, Marla Kincaid. That was the final straw. With Jana's help, we filed criminal charges for forgery and filing false instruments, both felonies under Colorado Revised Statute 185102. The sheriff's office didn't waste time this round. They picked her up at her trailer 2 days later. When they led her away in cuffs, the entire valley seemed to exhale. Neighbors came out onto their porches, watching silently as the self-proclaimed HOA queen was escorted off her stolen throne. Even Thomas Avery stood near his truck, arms crossed, expression unreadable. A month later, I got word from Jana. The DA had offered Marla a plea deal, probation, community service, and mandatory counseling for mental health evaluation. She accepted. I wish I could say I felt satisfied, but honestly I just felt tired. Tired of the drama, the paperwork, the constant vigilance. Retirement wasn't supposed to be court dates and restraining orders. It was supposed to be quiet mornings and long naps in the Sunday, so I tried to reclaim that peace. I fixed the old fence between my property and the field where her trailer had been planted, a new line of pines along the edge, and put up a wooden sign that read, "Private land, no HOA beyond this point." Neighbors loved it. Some even asked to copy it. It became a kind of local joke, a symbol of rebellion against overreaching HOA control. And for a while it worked. The peace returned, the valley grew green again, and the only sound that broke the stillness was the wind through the trees. But deep down, I knew this story wasn't quite done. Because while Marla might have been gone physically, the mess she left behind, her false filings, her warped sense of ownership, was still being cleaned up by the county. And one quiet morning when a county truck pulled up again to deliver final property adjustment papers, I noticed something odd on the paperwork, a new name listed under HOA interim president, Tina Mallory. Marla's best friend, the same woman who'd stood on my porch during that terrifying night. As I stood there, paper trembling slightly in my hand, I realized the war wasn't over. It had just changed generals. For a few precious weeks, I allowed myself to believe it was over. The air smelled sweeter, the nights were finally quiet, and I could sit on my porch again without feeling like I was under surveillance. The land looked beautiful, calm after chaos. The grass I'd replanted grew back bright green, the apple trees hung heavy with fruit, and even the local mailman stopped by just to say, "Looks like the valley's at peace again, Mr. Phillips." I smiled, nodded, and said the words I'd been wanting to say for months. Yeah, finally. But peace, I've learned, has a short lease when you live next to an HOA, especially one run by people who think the world owes them obedience. It started with something small, a letter. No, not another of Marla's crumpled rants. This one was official-looking, with a shiny, embossed seal that read Pine Elk Estates Interim Management Board. The letter announced that due to the sudden resignation of President Marla Kincaid, the HOA had appointed Miss Tina Mallory as interim president. My stomach dropped as I read the next line. Effective immediately, Pine Elk Estates, HOA will continue oversight of all properties within the extended Pine Elk community boundary, including non-member parcels under visual impact jurisdiction. Visual impact jurisdiction. I had no idea what that meant, but I was certain it was something they'd invented just to harass me. I took the letter to my lawyer Jana and laid it on her desk. She read it twice, then looked up unimpressed. They're bluffing. There's no such legal concept as visual impact jurisdiction. HOA covenants apply only to recorded properties listed in the CC and Rs. They can't invent new authority out of thin air. Try telling that to them, I muttered. Jana smiled. Oh, I plan to. But remember, they don't want legal truth. They want control. That week, I started noticing signs that control was exactly what Tina intended to take. The first time I saw her, she was standing near the same fence line where Marla used to linger, wearing a crisp blazer and sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. She had a clipboard, a phone, and a smug look that screamed new sheriff in town. Morning, I called cautiously. She smiled too wide, too rehearsed. Good morning, Mr. Phillips. I'm Tina Mallory. I'm stepping in to ensure smoother communication between the HOA and the local residents. I'm sure you remember Marla's unfortunate leadership. That's one way to put it, I said. She laughed, a sound as brittle as dry glass. Well, we're all about moving forward. I just wanted to clarify that your property is within our visual boundary. So any changes you make to the exterior paint, fencing, landscaping need prior HOA approval. I stared at her. Visual boundary, yes, she said confidently. Properties visible from within the Pine Elk Estates perimeter are considered part of our aesthetic environment. It's a new clause we're testing under community beautification standards. I blinked slowly. You do realize that's not a law, right? She tilted her head. It doesn't have to be. It's an agreement among neighbors. I didn't agree to anything, I said flatly. Her smile faltered. Well, maybe you will once you understand the benefits. I didn't bother replying. I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. Through the window, I saw her scribbling notes on her clipboard like some kind of field agent cataloging a crime scene. Over the next few days, the letters resumed new ones, this time typed neatly with the HOA letterhead, citing violations for things as ridiculous as excessive outdoor equipment, visibility, and unsanctioned fruit tree density. Apparently even my apple trees were now under scrutiny. At first I laughed, but laughter turned to anger when I realized she wasn't just writing letters, she was recruiting people. One Saturday morning, I saw a small group of residents from Pine Elk Estates walking the gravel road that passed my property, carrying clipboards and taking photos. They wore matching vests labeled Community Review Comedy. It looked like a parody of government authority, but they were deadly serious. I came out to the gate and called, "Can I help you folks?" A tall man with a camera replied, "We're documenting properties that affect the HOA's visual harmony." "You mean my house?" he shrugged. "We're just volunteers. Take it up with the board." I did. I marched straight over to the HOA office that afternoon, a small prefab building on the edge of the subdivision, painted beige and surrounded by manicured flower beds. Tina was inside, pretending to be busy behind a desk. "Well, Mr. Phillips," she said sweetly when I walked in. "How nice of you to visit." "Cut the act, Tina," I said, tossing the letter onto her desk. "You and I both know my property isn't under your jurisdiction. You've got no legal claim, no authority, and no right to harass me or anyone else outside your HOA. She leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Phillips, I think you misunderstand. We're simply maintaining community standards. If you feel targeted, perhaps it's because your property doesn't meet those standards." I laughed a sharp, humorless sound. "You know, that's exactly what Marla said. Right before she got arrested, her expression hardened. Threats won't change policy. Neither will fake authority," I replied. "But lawsuits do. You might want to call your lawyer." I turned to leave, but her voice followed me out the door. "Be careful, Gary. People don't like neighbors who make enemies of the community." That night, I set up another camera, this one facing the road. Something told me I was going to need it. Sure enough, 2 nights later, my motion alert pinged around 1:15 a.m. When I checked the feed, there were 3 people standing near my fence, flashlights sweeping over my yard. I zoomed in. One was Tina. The other 2 were the same volunteers I'd seen earlier. I called the sheriff immediately. Lawson answered on duty. "Gary," he sighed, "what is it this time? New HOA president. Same lunacy," I said. "They're out here on my property again with flashlights." He arrived 15 minutes later, caught them red-handed, and wrote them up for trespassing. Tina tried to argue, waving a printed map. "This is a community inspection," she yelled. Lawson held up his flashlight, unimpressed. "Lady, this isn't your subdivision. You step past that fence again and it's criminal trespass." Understand, Tina looked ready to combust, but she bit her tongue. The next morning, she doubled down, emailing me directly a clear violation of the no-contact order that still included agents and associates of Marla Kincaid. Her message was a masterpiece of arrogance. "Mr. Phillips, the HOA will not be intimidated by threats or legal manipulation. We act in the interest of communal preservation. Your property is disruptive to our visual environment. Further noncompliance will result in collective action." Collective action. Whatever that meant, it sounded like trouble. Jana was livid when I forwarded it to her. "She's committing harassment by proxy," she said. "We're filing an injunction." We did, and this time we added the HOA itself as a respondent, not just Tina. That opened the door for county-level scrutiny. When the district attorney's office reviewed the case, they found a mess: unpaid HOA taxes, unregistered documents, even falsified claims of county partnership. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Lawson again. "You'll love this," he said. "County just froze their HOA bank account pending investigation. Tina's been subpoenaed." I couldn't stop grinning. The visual jurisdiction nonsense collapsed overnight. Residents turned against her once they realized their dues were funding her personal crusade. Within days, she resigned, claiming medical stress. Rumor had it she skipped town soon after. When I walked out to the fence the next morning, the valley felt different. The air was lighter, the horizon clear. The fake HOA signs had been pulled down, and for the first time in over a year, there wasn't a single letter in my mailbox. Later that afternoon, Thomas Avery stopped by in his truck, tipping his hat. "Heard you finally ran off the Queen and her court," he said with a grin. "Guess the kingdom fell," I replied. He laughed. "Good riddance. You've done the county a favor." I looked across the quiet valley sunlight spilling over the fields and smiled. Maybe this time it really was over. But as I've learned in every HOA story, just when you think you've seen the last act, there's always an encore waiting backstage. And mine was about to come in the form of a lawsuit that would drag both Marla and Tina right back into my life one final time. For the first time in what felt like years, I was starting to breathe normally again. My mornings were quiet, the air sharp with the scent of pine, and for once the only sound breaking the calm was the crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked to get the mail. I remember thinking maybe, just maybe, the chaos had finally burned itself out. Then I opened the mailbox and froze. Inside sat a thick manila envelope stamped with bold red letters, "Official Notice, Civil Action Filed." I stood there for a long moment, staring at it, that old familiar weight settling on my chest. I tore it open, my fingers trembling slightly, and began to read. Plaintiffs Pine Elk Estates Homeowners Association and Miss Marla Kincaid defendant, Mr. Gary Phillips, cause of action. Defamation, interference with community governance, and unlawful obstruction of HOA jurisdiction. I actually laughed out loud. Unlawful obstruction of HOA jurisdiction, that wasn't even a real phrase. But the further I read, the less funny it became. They'd filed a civil suit in county court, claiming that my false accusations and harassment had caused emotional distress and financial loss to the HOA and its members. Apparently, my insistence that they had no authority and the resulting investigation that froze their accounts had damaged the integrity of the community. In simpler terms, I'd embarrassed them and they wanted revenge through paperwork. I called Jana immediately. She answered on the second ring, already sounding tired. "Let me guess," she said. "You got served." "Like a cheap diner sandwich," I muttered. "They're suing me for interfering with a fake HOA." She sighed. "I was afraid they might try this. It's not about winning, it's about exhausting you. They're trying to drain your time and money." "Well, they picked the wrong retired firefighter," I said. "I've fought bigger fires than this." Jana chuckled. "Good, because this one's gonna burn hot." 2 weeks later, we walked into the courthouse together. The hearing room was small but packed a dozen HOA members sitting behind Marla, whispering and glaring like a suburban jury. Marla herself looked smug, wearing a navy blazer this time instead of her signature pink. Her hair was perfectly styled, and if it weren't for the deep lines of bitterness etched across her face, she might have looked like a respectable woman. Tina sat beside her, pretending to be calm, but constantly glancing toward the bailiff as if expecting applause. The judge, an older man with silver hair named Judge Morales, called the room to order. "Plaintiffs, you may begin." Marla stood dramatically, clearing her throat. "Your Honor, for over a year, Mr. Phillips has subjected me and my community to harassment, defamation, and targeted intimidation. He's filed false complaints, interfered with our governance, and spread malicious rumors about me being arrested under false pretenses." "False pretenses," I muttered under my breath. Jana elbowed me gently. Marla continued, waving a stack of papers. "We are simply asking for restitution, emotional damages, reimbursement for lost HOA dues, and a formal apology acknowledging his unlawful obstruction." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Unlawful obstruction of HOA jurisdiction," she said proudly. There was a pause. The judge set down his pen. "Ma'am, I've practiced law for 30 years, and I've never heard that phrase in any statute." Marla blinked. "Well, it's a community legal concept." The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter. Even the clerk looked like she was holding back a grin. "All right," Judge Morales said, turning to Jana. Defense Jana rose smoothly, all professionalism and poise. "Your Honor, this is a textbook case of frivolous litigation. The plaintiff's HOA has no jurisdiction over my client's property, which is clearly recorded outside the HOA boundaries. Furthermore, Ms. Kincaid's repeated acts of trespass, false reporting, and forgery are already documented in criminal proceedings." Marla's jaw tightened, but Jana wasn't done. She picked up a thick binder and laid it on the table with a solid thump. "These are police reports, court records, and video evidence showing that Miss Kincaid and Miss Mallory repeatedly violated restraining orders and fabricated legal documents. We will be countersuing for malicious prosecution and defamation." The silence in that room was delicious. Marla started stammering, trying to object, but her attorney, a young, nervous-looking man, whispered something to her that made her freeze. Probably that she was in way over her head. The judge sighed. "Miss Kincaid, this entire proceeding seems to stem from personal animosity, not legal cause. You've wasted this court's time. The HOA's claim is dismissed." He turned to Jana. "The defendant's counterclaim, however, has merit. We'll schedule a separate hearing to address damages." Marla's face went pale. Tina slumped in her chair, whispering, "This isn't over," but it was, for her at least. The countersuit hearing came a month later. Jana presented everything: the fake documents, the videos, the 911 call transcripts, the restraining order violations, and the now public county findings that the HOA had illegally altered its charter. By the time she was done, the judge didn't even deliberate long. "Miss Kincaid, Miss Mallory, you are jointly liable for damages totaling $25,000. Additionally, you are prohibited from initiating any further contact or litigation against Mr. Phillips or his property. Violation of this order will result in contempt of court and potential jail time." Marla looked like she might actually faint. Tina muttered something about appealing, but the judge shut her down before she could finish. Jana leaned over and whispered, "Congratulations, Gary. You just bankrupted an HOA." I couldn't help but grin. Guess I finally did some good after retiring. After the case hit the local news, something incredible happened. Neighbors from all over Pine Elk County, people I'd barely spoken to, started stopping by. Some dropped off pies, others just shook my hand. A retired couple from the other side of the valley said, "You did what we all wanted to do for years. Stand up to them." Even the sheriff stopped by one evening, standing on my porch with a smile. "You know, Phillips Lawson said there's talk about renaming that valley road. Folks keep calling it No HOA Drive." I laughed. That's the best compliment I've ever gotten. But as funny as it was, the truth hit me later that night as I sat on the porch watching the sunset fade over the ridge. What happened wasn't just about me or my land, it was about power control and how quickly people can lose themselves when given a clipboard and a title. Marla's obsession with authority had consumed her so completely that she forgot what community actually meant. She wanted control more than she wanted peace. And that's what destroyed her. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to another county supposedly to start fresh. I could only imagine how long that would last. Tina, on the other hand, apparently stayed behind but kept a low profile. Rumor had it she was trying to sell her house, but no one wanted to buy property tied to a scandal. As for me, life finally returned to what I'd been dreaming of all along, mornings with coffee and sunrise light spilling across the orchard, afternoons, fixing things that didn't really need fixing, evenings, spent watching the sky turn orange and pink over Pine Elk Valley. I even started hosting small gatherings for the neighbors who'd stuck by me through it all. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted to freedom, not just from the HOA, but from the kind of madness that turns people into tyrants with bylaws. Every so often, someone new in town would ask about the sign by my gate, the one that says "Privet Land, no HOA beyond this point." And I'd smile, sip my coffee, and say, "That's not just a sign, that's a warning label." Still, on some nights when the wind howls through the valley just right, I swear I can hear faint echoes of Marla's voice, shrill, indignant, and powerless. Maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe, like every HOA Karen that's ever existed, she'll always haunt the edges of someone else's peace. But this time she won't be haunting mine. 6 months passed before I heard her name again. By then, Pine Elk Valley had finally settled into something that resembled peace. The fields glowed gold in the autumn sun, the air smelled faintly of cedar, and my biggest worry was whether the squirrels were stealing more apples than I could harvest. I'd even started sleeping through the night again, no motion alerts, no sirens, no shouting outside my window. For the first time since retiring, I felt like I'd actually retired. That changed the day I got a call from Deputy Lawson. His tone was polite, but measured, that familiar brace yourself voice every cop gets when he's about to tell you something you won't like. "Gary," he said, "you might want to come down to the county office. There's a development involving Miss Kincaid." I felt my stomach tighten. "Don't tell me she's back. She never really left," he said. "She's been living one county over, but apparently she's been filing paperwork again, this time against the county itself. She's claiming wrongful prosecution and harassment by law enforcement, and she's naming you as a co-conspirator." I let out a long sigh. "You're kidding. Wish I were." So I drove down to the courthouse, the same place I thought I'd never have to see again, and found Lawson waiting by the steps, coffee in hand. Inside, he showed me a stack of documents. Sure enough, there it was, in black ink: Plaintiff Marla Kincaid, Pine Elk Estates HOA, self-reinstated, because apparently she'd resurrected the HOA under her own name again. "She's trying to get the judgment overturned," Lawson explained. "Filed it pro se, no attorney. She's demanding the county reverse her conviction, expunge her record, and restore authority of the HOA." I stared at the paper, speechless. "Restore authority over what, a field of weeds?" He chuckled. "You'd be surprised what some people think power looks like." "Let me guess, the judge threw it out." "Not yet," he said, "but it's going to hearing next week. DA's office wants you there just to verify the prior case record." I didn't want to go. Every part of me screamed to stay out of it, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But something in me, maybe the part that spent decades running into burning buildings when everyone else ran out, couldn't let it go unfinished. So I went. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom and saw her again for the first time in months. Marla Kincaid looked like a shadow of the woman who once screamed through my front door. Her hair was dull, her clothes mismatched, and her face, once carefully powdered and smug, was lined with exhaustion. But her eyes, they were still the same, sharp, angry, unrepentant. She didn't have a lawyer this time, just a stack of disorganized papers and a spiral notebook filled with handwritten rants. When the judge, Honorable Deborah Keene called her to the stand. She stood, proudly clutching her binder like it was a shield. "Your Honor," she began, "this entire situation was a miscarriage of justice. I was targeted, humiliated, and stripped of my legal authority as HOA president, through lies and manipulation by the defendant, Mr. Phillips, and corrupt law enforcement." Judge Keene raised an eyebrow. "Miss Kincaid, you are aware that the previous judgment has already been settled and the damages have been paid." "That's irrelevant," Marla snapped. "I was coerced. They falsified evidence. She pointed straight at me, set me up." The courtroom fell silent. I didn't move, didn't speak. The judge sighed. "Miss Kincaid, do you have any new evidence supporting this claim?" Marla opened her binder, flipping frantically through pages. "I have witness statements from my HOA members." The judge leaned forward. "You mean the same HOA that was deregistered for forgery and false filings?" Marla's voice cracked. "That doesn't change the truth," Judge Keene folded her hands. "It does when the truth is built on paperwork that never existed in the first place." Jana, sitting next to me, whispered, "She's unraveling." I didn't respond. I was watching Marla, not out of anger anymore, but something closer to pity. She wasn't a villain now. She was a ghost, chasing her own delusion, lost in a maze of self-importance she couldn't escape. Finally, the judge cut her off. "Miss Kincaid, this case is dismissed with prejudice. You are hereby ordered to cease all legal actions pertaining to Pine Elk Estates, Mr. Phillips, or any property within this county. Do you understand?" Marla's face twisted. "You can't silence me, bailiff," the judge said calmly. "Please remove her from the courtroom." As the bailiff escorted her out, she turned her head toward me, eyes blazing. "You destroyed my life," she hissed. I met her gaze evenly. "No, Marla, you did that yourself." After that day, the valley truly began to heal. The county finalized its cleanup of Marla's forged filings, dissolving her reinstated HOA permanently. Tina Mallory quietly sold her home and moved away, leaving behind nothing but gossip and unpaid fines. The Pine Elk Estate sign was finally taken down by the county road crew, replaced with a plain green one that simply read Pine Elk Valley, Unincorporated. It felt symbolic. A few weeks later, Sheriff Lawson invited me to the county fair. "You've earned a night off," he said. "We're giving out a little community award. Might even have your name on it." I laughed, thinking he was joking, until that evening when he actually called me up in front of a small crowd. "This one's for a man who reminded us that community doesn't come from control," Lawson said into the mic, holding up a simple wooden plaque. "It comes from respect, integrity, and knowing when to stand your ground." The crowd clapped, and I felt my throat tighten a little. I wasn't a man who chased applause, but after everything, the sleepless nights, the false reports, the endless fights, hearing that felt like closure. Afterward, as I walked back to my truck under the string lights of the fairground, I saw Jana waiting by the gate. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she said, smiling. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Guess the good guys win sometimes." She laughed softly. "You'd be surprised how often that happens when they have cameras and a good lawyer." We stood there for a moment, watching the Ferris wheel spin slowly against the night sky. "What'll you do now?" she asked. "Live," I said simply. "Finally live." A month later, I decided to host a small gathering at the farm, just a few neighbors, some barbecue, and live music from a local band. It wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about reclaiming normalcy, about turning the page. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, I looked around at the people laughing under the string lights, kids playing tag dogs, chasing frisbees, folks clinking glasses. No HOA rules, no fines, no power plays. Just people being neighbors again. And that's when I realized something profound. Marla's downfall hadn't just freed me, it freed everyone she'd tried to control. She was a reminder of what happens when authority stops serving and starts ruling. When the last guest left that night, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars above Pine Elk Valley. The wind was calm, the trees whispering softly, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next disaster. Just before heading inside, I looked at the old wooden sign by my gate, the one that read "Private Land, no hoe beyond this point." It was worn now, faded by the sun, but I didn't take it down. I decided to leave it there as a reminder, not of the fight, but of what peace costs and why it's worth protecting. Because in a world full of people like Marla Kincaid, sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't fight fire with fire. It's to let them burn themselves out and rebuild quietly once the smoke clears. The HOA war was finally over, and for once, I was at peace. Winter came early that year. By late October, the first snow dusted the peaks above Pine Elk Valley, and a quiet stillness settled over everything, the kind of peace that feels both earned and fragile, like a truce signed after a long war. The mornings were crisp, the kind that turned your breath to fog, and every sound carried through the cold air like a whisper. It had been nearly a year since the last time I'd seen Marla Kincaid or heard her name mentioned in any official capacity. The lawsuit was done, the restraining orders were still in effect, and the county had long since cleared my property of any false filings. Life had finally returned to something resembling normal, though I was no longer the same man who'd arrived here just looking for peace. You can't walk through fire and come out untouched. That's the thing nobody tells you. Conflict changes you. It hardens you in some places, but it softens you in others. I used to believe that people like Marla were just born that way, entitled toxic, allergic to reason. But after everything that happened, I realized something deeper. Entitlement grows from fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of losing control, fear that the world is moving on without you. Marla wasn't fighting me. She was fighting the idea that her authority meant nothing beyond the borders she'd invented. And when reality stripped that illusion away, she fell apart. One morning in early November, I was sipping coffee on my porch when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. It was an older blue sedan with county plates. Out stepped a young woman in a gray coat carrying a folder under her arm. "Mr. Phillips," she called out, "I'm Deputy Clerk Sanders from the Pine Elk Court. I'm here to deliver something." I walked down the steps cautious. "What is it this time?" She smiled faintly. "Don't worry, it's not another lawsuit. Quite the opposite, actually." She handed me an envelope. "This is official notice that all pending or future filings from Miss Kincaid have been permanently restricted. She's no longer permitted to submit legal documents without pre-screening by a judicial officer." I opened it and scanned the paper. There it was in black ink, the final nail in the coffin of her legal crusade. "So that's it?" I asked. Sanders nodded. "That's it. You're finally free of her." I thanked her and watched her drive away, the crunch of her tires fading into silence. For a long moment I just stood there in the cold, the letter in my hand trembling slightly in the breeze. It felt surreal, like closing the last page of a book I'd been trapped inside for too long. Later that day I called Jana, my lawyer, to tell her the news. She laughed softly. "Congratulations, Gary. You just outlasted the HOA apocalypse." "I don't know if I should celebrate or build a bunker," I said. "Celebrate," she replied. "But keep the bunker plans handy, just in case." That winter, the valley came alive in a way I hadn't seen before. Without the constant tension hanging over us, the community began to rebuild, not through committees or charters, but through simple acts of kindness. The old rancher Thomas Avery started hosting Sunday cookouts again, inviting everyone from the valley. I began lending my tools to younger families who were fixing up their barns. Even the folks who'd once backed Marla quietly started showing up, humbled and grateful. One afternoon, a teenage boy knocked on my door, shuffling nervously. "Mr. Phillips," he said, "I was one of the kids who, threw the soccer ball into your yard." "A bunch of times," I chuckled. "Ah, you mean my fruit tree climber?" He blushed. "Yeah, sorry about that. Mom said I should apologize. You want help chopping firewood or something?" That small gesture hit me harder than I expected, not because I needed help, but because it reminded me that good can grow out of even the ugliest conflicts. That's when I decided to start something new. A few weeks later, I posted a handwritten sign by the Main Road Community Garden Project, "All welcome, no HOA." It was half joke, half rebellion. But by spring, the joke had turned into something real. Dozens of people showed up with seeds, soil, and shovels. We cleared a patch of land near the old creek and started planting tomatoes, beans, wildflowers, even pumpkins. There were no rules, no fines, no committees, just people cooperating because they wanted to. And maybe that was the ultimate revenge, building something beautiful on the ashes of their control. That summer, the county paper ran a story titled "Pine Elk Valley, the town that banned the HOA." They interviewed me, of course, though I told them the same thing I'd been telling everyone for months. I didn't defeat anyone. The law did. I just made sure the truth was louder than the lies. But truthfully, I did feel proud, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't let bitterness take over. There were plenty of nights I'd wanted to fight dirty to humiliate Marla the way she'd humiliated me. But that's the trap. Once you start fighting on their level, you become what you hate. Instead, I learned something else, something quieter, stronger. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It's patient. It takes notes. It builds its case in silence. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't need to shout. It just stands there undeniable. That's what I tell people now, whenever they ask me about the HOA story. And they always do. It's become something of a local legend, the old firefighter who stood up to a neighborhood tyrant and lived to tell the tale. Some even joke that I should write a book. Maybe one day I will. But for now, I'm content with the view from my porch, the mountains in the distance, the wind rustling through the apple trees, and the faint laughter from the community garden down the road. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, I noticed something carved faintly into the wooden post beside my porch, something I must have scratched in without thinking during one of those long, angry nights. It read, "Fireproof." I traced the letters with my thumb and smiled. Yeah, that sounded about right. After everything, the threats, the lies, the court battles, I'd come out the other side fireproof. So, if there's a lesson buried somewhere in this whole mess, it's this: stand your ground, but don't lose your soul. Let evidence speak louder than anger. And never, ever let anyone convince you that power means ownership over peace. Because peace isn't something they can grant. It's something you fight for quietly day after day until the noise fades and the truth remains. The HOA tried to take my home, my name, even my sanity. But in the end, they only gave me something stronger, a story worth telling, and a freedom that no title deed could buy. Now when the wind sweeps through Pine Elk Valley and rattles the sign by my fence, "Private Land," no hoe beyond this point, it doesn't sound like defiance anymore. It sounds like laughter, like victory, like home. And this time, it's finally mine. No amount of control can replace genuine community. Real strength isn't in rules or power, it's in restraint, integrity, and the courage to let truth do the talking. If you've ever faced your own HOA Karen, someone who tries to dictate your life, rewrite your story, or claim what's yours, remember this: stay calm, document everything, trust the law, and let karma handle the rest. It may take time, but peace earned through patience lasts longer than revenge won through rage. So wherever you're watching from tonight, take a deep breath, enjoy the silence, and hold on to your own peace like the treasure it is. Because out here in Pine Elk Valley, we've learned one thing for sure: no HOA lasts forever, but freedom does.